Hello and welcome to this Connective Peripherals tutorial video on our USB to serial converter advanced driver options. Today we will be utilising the ESU 1001 R100 USB to RS232 serial cable. Like all of our USB to serial converters, this utilises an industry standard FTDI USB to serial chipset. Once the device and driver have been installed on your machine, you can access the advanced driver options via the Windows Device Manager utility. Here the device will appear in two sections, the first being the COM ports and LPT section. Here we can see the cable appears as a USB serial port assigned to the COM number 8. If we right click on this and go to Properties and then Port Settings, we can see the default communication settings for the device, the first being bits per second or baud rate, then we have data bits, parity bits, stop bits, and any flow control settings. Moving on, we have the advanced driver options. The first option we have is the COM port number. Currently at COM 8, we can select any COM port number which is not already in use by the system, for example, COM port 3. Moving on, we have the USB transfer sizes. We have an option for both the receive buffer and transmit buffer. These by default are set to 4096 bytes, but can be altered all the way down to 64 bytes if necessary. We would recommend higher settings for faster performance and lower settings to correct performance problems which may be experienced at lower baud rates. The next option is our latency timer, which is an internal chip timer on the device. By default, this is 16 milliseconds, and we find this appropriate for the majority of applications, but you can lower this as necessary. We would recommend setting this no lower than 2 milliseconds. If an application uses a small amount of data, then a 2 millisecond latency timer will ensure quick response, as the device does not wait for a full packet to send application data back to the host machine to the COM port. Next, we have some timeout settings. We have a minimum read timeout and a minimum write timeout. These by default are 0 milliseconds, but can be set anywhere up to 10,000 milliseconds or 10 seconds if desired. Moving on to our miscellaneous options, the first of which is the serial enumerator. These can be enabled or disabled via the checkboxes on the right. The function of the serial enumerator is to detect a plug-and-play enabled device, such as a serial mouse or serial modem that is attached to the USB serial port. Now, if your USB to serial converter from Connective Peripherals is attached to a target device which streams data when you plug it into your host PC, Windows may detect this as a mouse and may cause erratic behaviour on your cursor. If you wish to disable this behaviour, please uncheck this box. The next option down is the serial printer. If enabled, the serial printer will disable the timeouts to allow for long delays associated with paper loading on printing devices. Next, we have cancel if power off. The cancel if power off option can be used to assist with problems encountered when going into a hibernate or suspend condition. Next, we have the event on surprise removal option. If enabled, this will trigger a system event if your USB to serial converter has a surprise removal. The next one down is set RTS on close, which will set the RTS pin on the USB to serial converter when the COM port has been closed. We've got disable modem control at startup. This option is used to control the modem signals DTR and RTS at startup. In normal operation, the modem control signals at startup follow the behaviour of a legacy port. However, due to the timing differences between a legacy port and a virtual COM port, a spike on one of these signals in the legacy port can appear as an assertion of the signal in the virtual COM port. Enabling this option will mitigate that behaviour. Finally, we've got Enable Selective Suspend, which will place the cable or USB serial converter into a suspend state after a timeout has elapsed. The drop down menu here can be used to select how long a timeout you wish. from anywhere between 1 and 3600 seconds. That just about covers all of the advanced driver settings for the virtual COM port. As previously mentioned, the device also appears in another section of Device Manager. This is the Universal Serial Bus Controllers section, where the device appears as a USB serial converter. Again, if we right click on this and go to Properties, and then Advanced, we have some options. The first of which being Load VCP. This loads the virtual COM port for the device, COM port 8. If this is unselected, the device may not load the COM port, so it's a good thing to check if you aren't seeing a COM port when you plug your USB serial converter into your machine, that this option is enabled. If this option is disabled, again we have an Enable Selective Suspend option, which works the same as the option in the COM port, where if enabled, the device will be put into a suspend state once the timeout has elapsed. The same options apply, 1 to 3600 seconds. That just about covers all of the settings for the device. Thank you for watching this Connective Peripherals tutorial video on advanced driver settings.